Hey everyone, welcome to the Safe Spaces Pod. Today we're joined by Dave Kehnast. It's going to be a fascinating little interview for us today, but this is episode 11, episode 12, not entirely sure. But Dave, welcome on and say hello to our listeners.
Hello to the listeners.
Well, what was that? Sorry.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, Dave lives the life, guys. Just so you know, on the front end, he lives in Southern California. He surfs. He is a professional life coach. He's been doing it for 11 years, and we're here today to talk a little bit about Dave's story, a little bit about Dave's motivations, and just to get started, Dave, can you explain what you do, what life coaching is, and how you got into it?
I got into life coaching as a result of quitting a corporate job. Actually, that I don't want to say I was unhappy at, but I saw that there was more available in life. There's something more than the 9 to 5 available, and that led to this sort of deep journey of spiritual exploration and transformation. And I was kind of led to life coaching as the result of a serendipitous turn of events. So I kind of accidentally fell into it. I wasn't planning on being a life coach. I don't think anybody wakes up one day and says, as a little kid, says, I want to be a life coach. And I mean, life coaching, what life coaching is, and it's in its deepest, I think that there are a lot of misconceptions about it. I think that there are a lot of judgments that people have around it. I think that, oftentimes I tell people what I do, and I'll say, oh, what qualifies you to be a life coach, And, unfortunately, there are a lot of people in the industry that don't have a lot of training, or any training. But in the deepest, I guess in its deepest sense, you could just say that life coaching assumes that anything is possible for human beings, kind of in general, and that human beings are unlimited possibility, and that, like for instance, anything is possible for you, and so it's really about it's about inviting people into a conversation, what I refer to as the big conversation, about their life and their existence. In a lot of ways, it's an existential conversation that a life coach has with a human being, about like what would being the most badass version of themselves look like. So it's deeply transformational. The work I do as a coach is deeply transformational for people. It calls out every piece of bullshit that you could find in a person in service of supporting that person in really stepping into their greatness. Not to use like a cliche term, greatness, but it really is about getting people present to their greatness. Does that answer your question?
Definitely. And just going off that, can you explain to our listeners a little bit about like what's your greatness? Like what are the things that you wake up every day and think about in order to strive to get to your vision of greatness? And obviously the surfing in Southern California, I'm sure plays a role in that, but can you explain some of the other aspects of your life that you try to strive for greatness in?
Well, I mean, hilariously, it does a lot of times, in a lot of ways, come down to surfing. Excuse me. For me, it was kind of a coach asked me, I want to say 11 years ago, what would the greatest version of yourself look like? I was living in Chicago at the time. I was on Lake Michigan. I surfed on Lake Michigan in the winter times, and I just loved it so much. I just loved it. I can't even describe it. Describe the love I had for it. And so a life coach was like, well, how would you like things to look? I'm like, well, I would like to live in California, and I would like that, and I would like to be able to go to Chicago when I feel like it to see my family, and I would like to be able to go back and forth between Chicago and California, and I would like to surf 150, 200 days a year or more, or 300, 365, however many, right? And so the coach then asked, well, what's in the way of that? And so I was the thing in the way of that, And so for me, stepping into greatness really had to do with, like I love coaching too, right? I went through a coach training program, and so that for 4 years approximately, and so for me, I had to really develop my skills as a coach to become good enough at it to have it afford me the luxury of living in Southern California with the schedule I wanted, so that I could surf as much as I wanted to, right? So it's like, okay, if you want to surf every day, you better figure out a way to make money so that you can do that. You know what I mean? And so there's not, it's all interrelated. You know what I mean? So for me, stepping into greatness involved like honing my skills so that I could afford to support myself, so that I could, support my surfing habit, right? So that was kind of like stepping into greatness. I mean, at another level, like it comes down to, am I, coming up with enough tools and what I refer to as distinctions. I invent these little models. And when I'm of human behavior, right? When I'm inventing a model of human behavior, right, that is relatable to the average human being, say on Facebook, that I need to be honoring my brain, right, and my brilliance in such a way that applies. I need to be honoring the fact that I contribute something to this world as a human being, right? And so how that looks is, am I writing enough? Am I releasing on my podcast enough, which I actually haven't been? Am I writing? Am I playing my music enough? I like to play guitar. Am I doing that enough, right? Am I showing up to my interpersonal relationship powerfully and successfully, vulnerably, et cetera, right? So the job of like a life coach really like is to have their life be working, and it's never always working. It's not always working everywhere, always, right? But that's ultimately what's it's going to make you successful. Is, are you looking in your own life where there is to look? If that makes sense.
No, definitely. And going off that, you mentioned a spiritual awakening or a spiritual revolution that you had in your life that allowed you to conceptualize greatness in the way that you were describing. And I think in our society, there aren't enough safe spaces for people to talk about like spirituality and things of that nature. So I'd love for you to get into that and kind of explain to our listeners what that looked like and what forms it took.
Say the last part, what that looks like and what?
And like what forms your spirituality took.
Well, I mean, I found what is commonly referred to as God through a very traditional path of addiction recovery through an anonymous program. And that was sort of my introduction to what I just call God, and you can call it whatever you'd like. And that was how I found God, sort of post-religious upbringing that I, as a teenager, rebelled against, and then so that was sort of my initial introduction to God, was real authentic introduction that I wanted as a grown-up human adult, right? Was through recovery, and then and it just kind of evolved from there. So my spirituality is not, it's not. I don't want to say it's not really definable. I don't subscribe to a particular religion. I think it's great if people do. Mostly, often it is. But my God is very unlimited in nature.
And where do you?
We'll just call it the universe, or whatever.
Okay. And where do you draw the? I guess like where are your God's morals and principles displayed to you? Like, do you draw on the Bible? Do you draw on different types of signs you get from the universe, or like where do you draw on like the truth that your God represents?
Well, I mean, like if you want to evolve spiritually, like you could look at the 10 Commandments, right? And tell any human being don't steal, be nice to your mom and dad, don't look at your neighbor's wife, right? Don't talk shit about people, don't bear false witness, be kind, right? That's not one of the 10 commandments, but and just living by those principles they're universal. They're going to work for anyone, anywhere, for all of time. You know what I mean? And you could look at the 12 steps and just do what the 12 steps say, and your entire life will transform, right? And I find that the most powerful spiritual orientations, I guess, are the most simple, right? So if you look at the 10 commandments, you're not killing somebody, or not talking trash about somebody, or not looking at your neighbor's wife, or not committing adultery. Those are very, very, very simple things, right? And I find that the most powerful spiritual avenues are the simplest. And, they're not things that human beings necessarily do all the time at all, and that's okay. Because I think that compassion and forgiveness of ourselves and others should also be one of the principles that we live by.
Definitely. And just going back to surfing and circling back to that concept, do you consider that a spiritual experience? Because I was an athlete myself, and sometimes when you're on the court or on the field, you feel kind of the spiritual elements that performing with your body represents. So I'm curious if you take a spiritual aspect away from surfing every day.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are moments on the face of a wave where, all time disappears, and you're just presented with the ultimate oneness, but you and the entire universe, and that's why surfers do it, and I think that any athlete has moments of transcendence, where there's just there's a melting away of everything, and all that exists is the moment, yes, I think surfing for me personally is, it's one of the ultimate forms of human existence, and that's why all surfers do it. You have these beautiful transcendent moments, but those moments aren't limited to surfing, by any stretch.
Definitely. And so you mentioned Southern California. Obviously, when you think about Southern California, you think LA, San Diego. No way you're in Encinitas, California, correct?
I live just north of there in a town called Oceanside, so very close.
Because I spent a month in Encinitas before my junior year of college, just surfing for a month. So
Cool.
I really can relate to your lifestyle, and it's pretty unbelievable just when you're able to live like that. Especially, it seems like the way your career allows you to live your life allows you to be present in those moments, and you don't necessarily need to be harping on the decisions of the day or menial tasks throughout the day while you're out there. And I think that's what's so unique about the entrepreneurial lifestyle, and that's why it's so intriguing to so many. So can you talk about becoming an entrepreneur and being an entrepreneur?
Well, it's interesting you mention that. I personally believe I see entrepreneurialism. I think that's the word. I really do see it as a spiritual journey. I see entrepreneurialism having to do with freedom, and in the spiritual sense, I think it's a shame that the concept of freedom has been sort of bastardized in our, recent culture, because, given that, freedom gets sort of labeled as some sort of MAGA type of thing, when freedom is actually it's a spiritual thing. And so entrepreneurialism, right, is really about, I see that in my opinion, entrepreneurialism is about a human being discovering what there is to discover about this human experience, right? And so, when I got to a point where my business was more or less running itself, give or take, right? There was something that I had discovered about myself and about the nature of this existence that couldn't be taken away. You know what I mean? Like me having created this life, where I surf every day that there are waves if I feel like going, right? And do amazing work in the afternoons with human beings who I love dearly, right? And basically just getting to do kind of whatever I want, right? Like that, like I've gained something about the nature of this entire human conundrum in that process. And I think that I don't think all entrepreneurs relate to it as spiritual, but it is spiritual,
Definitely. And so
I find it to be, I call it the spiritual plight of the entrepreneur.
Okay, so going off that, this is something that weighs heavily on my heart as a senior in college and someone that is now having to make decisions about what I'm going to do the next year. Personally, I don't think the 9 to 5 is what God put us on this earth to do. I don't see that being the path, and obviously, given my circumstances, that confronts me every day because your parents want you to get the 9 to 5. Your parents want you to be safe. Your parents are worried about you and want you to have the most comfortable life possible because they care for you. What would you say to a senior in college that's thinking about taking that path and living off the land and finding the path that God has for them, not outside of that traditional 9 to 5 trajectory?
I would say take your freaking time, man. Like I moved to Steamboat, Colorado after I graduated college. I lived there. I wish I'd have stayed for 5 more years. You know what I mean? But I moved out of there when I was 25, I think, and because I was in this great big rush to get it going, and that was a mistake. You know what I mean? Because you can't put a price on a powder morning. You can't get enough of those in your life. You can't get enough powder days on a ski mountain in a lifetime, right? I'm 47 years old, and the thing that I value more than anything is waves. It's the stoke. I don't want to say I don't care about anything else because that's not true, but it's something I value above and beyond almost anything else. And so you got all the time in the world, man. Like you got a kid who's 22, 23, not to call you a kid, but like a person who's 22 or 23 years old who thinks that there's a rush to get somewhere is gravely mistaken. Right?
No, most definitely, and I think that's what society tells us too, and again that's away from the spiritual aspect you were talking about because I think society and like spiritual elements I think collide head to head. I think they're in a conflict every single day, and it's interesting to talk to someone that with your perspective because I feel like you don't buy into society, and you talked about some of the criticisms some of your friends may have given you about like being a life coach and what credentials you may have to do that, but that's just what society's telling you, and you kind of go against that. It seems like, at least.
Yeah, I mean, fuck society. You know what I mean? Like, fuck society's rules. Like, really. And I used to have a much more destructive way of, that. but I don't. I'm sorry. I wasn't born to follow. I just wasn't. Like, you can't tell me what to do. And I say that as a person who cares for other human beings, who cares for his fellow citizen, who's, what I mean, is compassionate and all these other things. So I don't want that to come off like I'm some sort of MAGA guy, because that's not it. But and I think that there's an element to the entrepreneurial spirit that can't be caged. You know what I mean? And I think that I find that you poke and prod an individual a little bit. Like, it's funny because sometimes I'll get hired to coach somebody within an organization, like within a company, and I don't think I've ever coached somebody in the company that has kept their job at that company.
That's awesome.
You just start asking them questions. It just becomes very clear that they're not happy. And I'm not talking about a small percentage of people. I'm talking about a big percentage of people. You
No,
know,
100%. I would say 80% of people that work those big corporate jobs aren't necessarily fulfilled every night when they get home.
right?
Yeah. And so, speaking about the entrepreneurial spirit, I think a key part of the entrepreneurial spirit, and you may disagree with me on this, is reading. I think all the entrepreneurs I know in my life are avid readers and have authors that they love. And we were talking about this a little bit off air, but so obviously my name's Francisco de Conde, favorite character in a novel ever. What would you say to Ayn Rand's objectivism platform in the fact that she hates spirituality? Like she hates the concept of a god. And that was one thing that I enjoyed about reading the book because it shows you can have differing opinions from your
Right.
favorite authors. Because I agree with almost everything she's saying, but she curses God or spirituality in her book.
I find that very unfortunate. But as a person who has cursed God, I get it. I just find that I find atheism to be incredibly limited, and I find atheists often to become paradoxically religious in their disdain for religion, right? And so I find that to be I find it to be unfortunate. And but at the same time, I get it. It's just kind of like in the same way that I'm never going to puke or vomit my God on anybody. Please don't puke or vomit your secularism on me. You know.
Most
So
definitely. Yeah.
what's
No,
that?
I said most definitely. And that's, I think, a good way to think about it because everyone has different relationships. Like, even if you just tie in other religions, like you mentioned, your God isn't religion specific, but when you evaluate different religions, obviously they have different beliefs. But at the end of the day, in most of the situations, it's coming back to the same God, which at least Ayn Rand doesn't agree with it, but I'm sure other authors do and other people do in their own different ways.
Right. I mean, yeah. I mean, by all means, like I was an incredibly militant atheist for a long time. You know, so I think that people, you know, so long as you're not hurting anybody, do your thing. Do
Definitely.
your thing. I don't know Ayn Rand actually. I've never that those books are far too vast for me to take on.
No, and they're old too.
There's
They're,
something about government regulations in them. I guess she doesn't like government regulations. I don't know.
yeah. Okay, so you're not a big Ayn Rand fan. Who are you a big fan of? I'd love to know. I'm guessing
I'm
Tim
not saying I'm
Ferriss.
not an Ayn Rand fan. I just haven't read it.
Okay.
Perhaps at some point I will take that on. Uh, I am who am I? I'm a huge. I actually read a heck of a lot of nonfiction. I read a lot of spiritual literature. Dr. David Hawkins is one of my favorite authors. Lately, I've been picking off the Star Wars books. There's hundreds of them. So I just read Dawn of the Force. Takes place 40,000 years before Luke Skywalker. Huge John Irving fan. I was big into John Irving when I was a kid or when I was in college. I just read a Deepak Chopra book called Quantum Healing, which was great. A huge music fan, actually. Huge fan of punk rock and all kinds of different music.
Punk rock. Can you explain that a little bit to me? I can't say I'm familiar with that genre.
Punk rock is awesome, man. I don't know. It's just like
Can you
I
name
grew
some
up in-
artists?
I mean, there's so many. No Effects, Bad Religion, Circle Jerks, Descendants. I got into this band, No Use for a Name Today. There's something about punk rock is basically fuck you. You know what I mean? and it's pretty. I mean, talk about it. It's explicit. It's pretty explicitly unspiritual, also, right? So there's a disdain of religion, a disdain of God, a disdain of anything organized. It's all about anarchy. I just love them. You know what I mean?
What about the Sex Pistols? Are they considered punk rock?
Yeah, they're one of the first punk bands. I'm not a big fan of them, but
Yeah.
they're one of the first punk rock bands ever.
No, I was in a group workshop with someone doing their senior thesis on the Sex Pistols, so that was definitely an eye-opening experience just based on the lyrics they were talking about.
Right. Nice. Yeah, they're punk as fuck for sure.
So I think a big part of recovery and a relationship with oneself comes down to working out. And I don't know if you agree with me on that or not, but can you talk? And we didn't actually touch a lot on your recovery story on this pod. We talked about it off air a little bit, but can you talk to me about what you do for your health? Like, is surfing your only way you stay in shape, or what are you doing for your health?
I surf and I do Kundalini yoga.
You're a yogi? No freaking way,
Yeah.
you're a yogi. I'm a huge yogi.
No, I'm a pretty devout yogi.
I pay $150 a month for a yoga studio right next to my house,
Good. I think everybody needs to do yoga.
and it's worth every penny.
Oh, yoga is freaking awesome. I love yoga.
Okay, can you talk about your like entry into yoga? Were you doing that when you were in college? Were you doing that when you got older? Like, when did yoga like enter the scene?
Well, I think I can't remember. I mean, obviously I'd heard of yoga, right? But I think I want to say I went to my first yoga. I can't remember my first yoga class. I think it might have been like my senior year in college, and I remember like being like, oh, whatever yoga, and then all of a sudden, 3 or 4 seconds into a pose, I was like, oh, this shit is not a joke. At all. And then I went to Bikram yoga. I think I want to say it was like, I'm not sure when it was. Yeah, it was probably like 2003. I went to a Bikram yoga class expecting not much. And within about 40 seconds, I knew that the next hour and a half was going to seriously suck. You know, and it did. It was incredibly excruciating. It was an excruciating physical workout. And that was kind of my intro. And then I got into yoga, I want to say about 7 or 8 years ago. And I would classify myself as a certified yogi. You know, I'm a certified Kundalini yoga teacher, actually.
Really? And
yeah.
So the yoga teacher is an interesting route. What other things are you doing outside of life coaching? Like, you definitely have a lot of time on your hands. What other things are you interested in? Obviously, yoga teaching would be incredible. What other things do you like to do?
I mean, I surf. I do yoga. I play my guitar. Not enough lately. I'm finishing up a book. I have about 10,000 words out of 100,000 edited, fully ready to go. It's a memoir. It's an addiction memoir. You know, I go to Trader Joe's. I cook. That's about it.
Okay, I'd love to touch on that memoir, because I think everyone's best case scenario for career is probably writer at some point in their life. And I haven't ruled it out in my life yet, because I enjoy writing more fiction. But can you talk about the process of writing a memoir? Did you write every word, or did you hire someone to help you write it, or just explain that process a little bit?
Yeah, I wrote every word. It took a very long time. I have over 100,000 words written or more. It's very, very, very. It's just really hard. You know, like, that's it. It's being a writer. Like, I don't consider myself a writer, because writers are almost like obsessed. You know, but I've written a lot. You know, so it just requires this really. One of the things we talk about in coaching is commitment, right? Like, it's just this really, writing a book, or at least finishing a rough draft of a book, was one of the hardest commitments I ever took on. You know.
Definitely. And you said you're in the process of getting that done?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. That's going to be a must read, listeners. Like, take note.
It's pretty gnarly, man. It's a pretty crazy story. So.
Yeah, and I feel like that's the point of this pod. It's a place where people can talk openly about struggles, triumphs, and I think that's a lot of what your memoir is trying to do, and a lot of what you try to do in your career. So that's fascinating. And I'm curious, what's your end game? Like, is life coaching something where you feel like, okay, I'm going to retire at this age, or is it something like, I can do this forever?
I mean, I could do it forever, man. Like, it's funny, because I was like walking through Trader Joe's today, and I was seeing like the old people like working at Trader Joe's, and they're working like 15 hours a week at Trader Joe's in retirement. And I'm like, I could do what I do forever. You know, like, I don't see myself ever not doing it. I don't know what I would do all day.
Yeah.
It's not like I work that much, so it's pretty cool.
No, definitely. And just so this is, just so you know, this is a kind of college central podcast. Like this is targeted towards early college students or maybe late high school. I don't know how age specific the topics have been on this. I hope they've been age specific enough. But can you tell us about what Dave was like in college? Like what was Dave the college student like, whether academically or socially or anything you want to share?
Dave, Dave majored in partying,
Haha.
and that's all Dave did was party. That's all most of the people I knew in college did, and yeah, Dave was a shit show.
Yeah, how are you academically? I'm curious because I have my own struggles.
Okay. Once I finally, towards the end, I discovered this love for history, and so I did really well in those classes.
Okay, what do you love in history? You're speaking my language. I'm an econ major, but I realized halfway through that I would rather major in history, so I just decided to major in both. Like I'm a gigantic history buff. So like, what are your favorite areas of studying?
I mean, personally, the Vietnam War I was really into. This author, Tim O'Brien, is just the best author ever. He's actually, back to your question regarding what I would read, Tim O'Brien, I've read all his work. His work is mind-blowing. His book, The Things They Carried, is mind-bending. I mean, it's just the craziest book ever. But, yeah, I just find history to be, fascinating. And if I'm frightened regarding what's happening now because history is repeating itself in incredibly disturbing ways, and nobody's paying attention to it, or they're so caught up in it that they don't realize it. So, yeah.
No, definitely. And just going off that, who's your favorite president? Just curious.
I mean, none.
None.
No.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, I guess maybe Abraham Lincoln. Freed the slaves. Who else? Maybe I don't even know. I mean, the older, the more jaded I get, I just see all of them as just part of one big freaking club. So I don't know.
No, that's fair. That it seems like you're definitely anti-establishment, which I kind of love because there's got to be people that are anti-establishment in every society, and I think they're good for holding people accountable. And I don't know how vocal you are in terms of politics, but I do think that perspective. How vocal you are in politics, but I do think that perspective.
I mean, I'm a very, I guess you would say, a traditional liberal, traditional leftist, which I would say is very distinct from this new American phenomenon of whatever you want to call it with this left stuff. I don't subscribe to this new whatever it is, but I have very, 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 very liberal views in regards to day-to-day political issues.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I wish people like my age realized is, given their outcry and given their activism in different areas, the most important things are local elections. And I don't think people take that into account enough. And so they almost cry wolf in the infographic age with what they put on social media, but then at the same time they'll skip their local elections. So I think there's just like a lot of hypocrisy in just politics in general. I'm sure. So one question I was going to ask you is, do you see politics affecting some of the people you're coaching in life? Like, do you see politics like negatively impacting their lives?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I have a trans client, that, their life has been affected. Yeah. But not that much.
Really?
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's a really interesting question because now that you bring it up, not that much.
The way I was kind of thinking about it was at the relationship level. Like I just noticed after like the COVID intensity of politics, because everyone was at home watching the news all day. I just noticed like conversations around the dinner tables changing. Like I noticed like family dynamics changing more than maybe people's individual lives. It's just the way we communicated with each other.
Well, I think I mean, I would agree with you, but I really see, I don't, it's very, I'm in a really interesting, one of my things is I really focus on the nuances. Um, I focus on the nuances everywhere, and there's so much nuance happening, but it's being presented by the media in a different way, and I find that the media is eliminating nuance or attempting to eliminate nuance, and I find that to be dangerous and discouraging, to say the absolute very least.
Yeah, no, and I can at least speak to that as a conservative student at a liberal arts college. I'll turn in papers on stuff I believe get a C, and then I'll turn in papers on stuff that they want to hear, and I'll get a A. So
Yeah, it's I find academia to not be helping anything either. I mean, there's a rabbit hole here I don't want to go down, but I find that the censoring of conservative voices, or the denigrating of conservative voices, that I very, 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 very often disagree with, to be an incredibly startling and discouraging trend. And what I'm noticing is that there are more and more people who are like me, who are traditional liberals, um, turning away from that which is being presented as the truth because they recognize it as not being the truth. And they're starting to communicate outside of traditional outlets, if that makes sense.
no, definitely. And just based on all the political talk, what you see in the United States, it seems like you obviously have your disagreements with how things are run, and obviously healthy disagreements. Is there another country that you could ever see yourself living in, or is it the U.S. or bust for you?
I mean, I never thought I'd be seeing this kind of thing, but God bless the U.S. I find it to. I was an incredibly anti-American 20-something person. You know what I mean? I used to walk around with a upside down American flag patch sewed to the ass of my jeans. You know what I mean? And that was in the Bush junior years, right? And but when I think about what a day in the life of is for me, it's pretty freaking good. It just is. There's plenty of food. Um, there's plenty. I get to do whatever I want, basically. And I say that it's interesting because I say that as a person who has been trapped inside of the system. I've been locked up in jail. I've been faced with criminal charges. I've been at the mercy of a judge, and I was treated judiciously. I certainly recognize that that is not the case for everyone, but at the same time, I was given more chances than I deserved, and I speak from my own personal firsthand experience.
Yeah, no, I'm a fervent lover of the United States, and just like that's a lot of where my history inspiration comes from. Just I'm a huge United States history buff, and I just think it's a great place to live. But I that's why it's hard for me at a school that's so like liberal arts oriented because I understand where people's reservations come from. Like I really truly understand what disagreements they do have with the federal government or different types of policies that affect different types of communities. But I do fundamentally believe the United States of America is a good place, and that's why it hurts me so much to go to school here because I feel like I'm in the vast, vast minority.
Well, if you look at the spiritual origin of the United States Constitution, the Constitution of the United States exists to protect the spiritual freedom of the individual, and that gets lost. That gets lost on a lot of people. If you say you love the Constitution, it doesn't make you a right-wing nut. And a lot of those on the right that do understand that do appreciate the Constitution, they're often appreciating the spiritual nature of it, right? And I was a hater. I was hating the country that allowed me to say how much I hate it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's what I feel like. I feel like people
nationalism and patriotism. What's that?
No, and that's what I was gonna say. I feel like people are almost chanting into an antechamber, or not antechamber, or what's the thing that reflects the words back? An echo chamber. Like I feel like these people are protesting into an echo chamber. It's like you're protesting because you have the ability to protest. Like you are at this great hotsy-totsy liberal arts school and you're preaching to the choir. Like everyone's trying to get it fixed and everyone's working proactively to fix it. So I just feel like it's like an echo chamber effect.
Yeah, it's something. I have I see the whole thing. I see people. I see a lot of I just watched a video today of these supposedly freedom loving or peace loving or equality wanting people trying to kill this poor young college student who happened to have conservative views. This happened like 3 days ago. It's terrible. I mean, it's absolutely terrifying. So there's this paradox happening with these supposedly extremely liberal people who are completely and totally what's the word? Intolerant of those who don't have tolerant enough views for them. And it's starting to eat its own head. Like it's starting to be a snake eating its own tail. So,
Hello? I lost you for a second. I lost you after snake after its own tail. Or
yeah, no, it's becoming if equality means equality or it doesn't mean equality, right?
Yeah.
And so I may not like what you have to say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. That's what I see being a liberal is all about.
And I think your understanding and love of the Constitution, or maybe not love, but your understanding of it allows you to do that. Like I think everyone that talks bad about the United States, similar to the people that talk bad about God, like go read the Ten Commandments or go read the Constitution. Like there's not going to be anything in those things that you like disagree with.
No, exactly. It's interesting times. I think that the pendulum is swinging. I think there are a lot of people just dipping out of the media narratives and having healthy, productive conversations with one another, which is amazing.
Most definitely. And so this is completely unrelated, but I would be remiss with myself if I didn't ask you this. I know we're probably run up on time, and I appreciate how long you've stayed on at the Safe Spaces pod. Really appreciate it. But can you describe the differences in your life that alcohol had compared to drugs? Because I think that like when it comes to addiction, they both have their ties, they both have their hold on people, but I think in such different ways. And I would just love to hear what you think about that. Maybe so I can understand it better in my own life, or people that listen to this can understand it better in their own life. But I think they're so connected but so different that I'd love to hear your, analysis of the two of them against each other.
Between drugs and alcohol?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I spaced out for a second there. I mean, in my opinion, alcohol is arguably the most destructive drug that there is. You could even make the argument it's more destructive than heroin, for the simple fact that a heroin addict, even if they were driving their car, right, is like less likely to cause the kind of destruction that is caused as a result of a drunk person getting behind the wheel. I find that alcohol, there's a specific type of destruction that happens as a result of consuming massive amounts of alcohol at the addicted level, that is unlike any other. I find alcohol to be the cause of, there's a heroin addict isn't going to get high on heroin and slap their wife or do violence or anything like that. They might, do violence to get money to buy it. They might steal to buy it. Certainly, there is that to consider. But I find that the destruction that comes as a result of mass alcohol consumption is horrific.
Definitely. And so going off that, this is something I've been noticing just in like the country. Just given my travels, I like to drive around the country every year just to get out to school and stuff. I notice a change from a stimulant culture, in like liquor stores compared to like dispensaries. Like there is I think a conscious change going from a stimulant culture to a depressant culture. Like, what do you think about that? Like, do you think
What do you
that
mean stimulant depressant? Because
so
alcohol is a depressant.
you would calculate alcohol as a depressant? I think maybe. Okay, maybe this goes against my whole point then, but I think the drugs are so different. I think alcohol is a less sedentary drug than weed, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, weed is. I mean, weed. Smoke as much weed as you want. I guess like stoners, they're just stoners. But the thing about weed is that it truly. I mean, it really is a gateway drug in a lot of ways. A lot of people just stick with the weed, and that's all they ever do, and that's fine. And I would agree with you that perhaps we are shifting away from an alcohol culture to a weed culture, but alcohol will always be doing its thing.
Yeah, no, definitely. And same with cigarettes. It's like the same
Right.
effect that everyone knows the drawbacks, but cigarettes are going to be sold for the next 50 years no matter what anyone says.
Yeah, man, for sure.
No, yeah. I'm curious, do you see a future in the next 10, 20 years? And I don't know how much you want to talk about this, where you have a dinner party, you invite people over, and instead of drinking a glass of wine, you go outside on the porch and smoke a blunt. Like say you have a couple's dinner party. Do you see a future in that happening?
I mean, I already see that happening.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, but I don't hang out with the drug people really at all.
That's fair. That's
I
completely
don't.
fair.
I'm not around. I'm a sober person. I'm not really around drugs.
Okay, and so you just brought it up, and we could wrap up whenever, but I'd love to have you explain your mindset of being a sober person, and you describe yourself as that. So you obviously take pride in it, and I'd love to know what that day to day looks like, even 11, 12, however many years after recovery.
It's been almost 15 years, and I don't know if I take pride in it. I don't know if that's the right word. It might occur as if I do. Maybe I do, but for me, it's a life free of substances, crippling substances, and that requires a spiritual relationship that is a relationship with what I call God, that is kind of first and foremost, and that God is just of my understanding. It's of a higher power that is of my understanding, but that higher power is kind of the thing in charge. And my challenge day to day is staying in touch with it, staying in communion with it, staying connected with it, so I don't fuck anything up, And the byproduct of that spiritual relationship is that I don't care to be drinking or using drugs anymore.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And you mentioned the communication with that higher being. What does that look like? Is that journaling? Is that prayer? Is that just overall reflection? Is that writing your memoir? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, that's mostly prayer and meditation.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's it's a beautiful thing. No, it's and just for our listeners, no, I don't think I did Dave's story justice in what he's been able to do in terms of recovery, but it's I'm sure he would attest to this. It's an everyday thing, and he's been on the grind for the last 15 years. So we're happy to have him on here and just sharing his story. So, Dave, is there anything you want to say before we finish up?
No, man. Peace and love. Be nice to one another. That's it.
I love that. Yeah, no, everyone, Dave is probably our biggest guy on the pod so far, and he's been incredible today. So let's all give it up for Dave in the comment section. Maybe I don't know where this is eventually going to land, but Dave, thank you so much.
Thank you, Francisco.